My guest today is Ali Adair Chung. She is the founder and curriculum designer of Beachcities Classical, a classical Christian homeschooling collaborative based in Huntington Beach, California, that she launched in October of 2021 and that now serves about 250 students. Ali is a former educator teaching in public schools, private schools, charter schools, a whole host of different grade levels, and brings her experience also as a homeschooled high schooler to her design work around holistic, individualized education. So, Ali Adair Chung, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. I absolutely love the work you're doing here, and the encouragement that everybody gets to keep expanding these options for families through your work. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks, Ali. It's just so great to have you on the show and to hear more about your journey. I'd love to start with kind of your entry point, I suppose, into alternative education models, which occurred when you were in high school. You told me before we started recording that you were homeschooled for sort of the tail end of your high school experience, and it transformed your whole family. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would love to share. I went to private Catholic school and then public school, and my family comes from a long line of going to traditional school. Homeschooling was not something, we didn't know anybody who did it. We hadn't seen it anywhere. To say the idea was foreign would be a stretch. It was really not on the menu at all. And then I had the opportunity to travel with a group called the Young Americans, which is a performing arts musical theater group. And I got to travel all over the world, which was amazing. My parents really struggled with the idea of letting me do it, because they were like, I had to homeschool. The high school would not work with us to let me go out on tour and come back. So the only option was homeschooling. And my parents were terrified. They were so terrified. They literally went to the high school and were like, we want your books. We will buy your books. And we're going to bring her right back. She's going to go right back in. So that first beginning stage when I was homeschooling, I was literally doing my books from the high school in the neighborhood. That didn't last very long. But we did that because my parents were so nervous. They were so afraid. They didn't know what to expect. They were worried they'd ruin everything. But this opportunity was just such a big opportunity that they overcame that fear and let me go for it. Within just a couple of months, they brought my sister home. It transformed our family in such a significant way on every level. Every level. My sister is okay with me sharing this, so I'm going to share a little bit. I would be the gate student, typical straight A, type A, teacher's pet kind of kid. And my sister had some learning challenges, very salty and spicy, which I love about her. But she really struggled in institution schooling on that end. And then as we realized once I left it, I was actually really struggling too, because I was so focused on doing exactly what I was told and making everything right, that it really wasn't actually a healthy place for either of us. So after being out for a couple of months and my parents being so brave and pulling out my sister actually asked to as well. She saw what I was doing and was like, okay, I want to try that. I mean, she went from probably not going to graduate to now she has multiple degrees and she's done her dream jobs. She did like special effects for some of the big superhero movies that we know. And now she's an art teacher doing these it's amazing. The stuff she does never ceases to amaze me. And she was really on track to not graduate at all. But yeah, so it was transformative for our entire family. So I decided I'm going to go and I'm going to get my teaching credential and I'm going to bring this amazing magic of homeschool into the schooling system because it's so good. And after teaching, like you said, in private, in public, and in charter programs, I realized that that system was designed intentionally, that it works as it's meant to. And so trying to bring in things to shift it, it's like coming to someone and saying, oh, your faucet's broken, but it turns on, the water comes out. It's just coming out into the yard instead of inside, but that's what they wanted, right? And so bringing these ideas in was not really going to work. So I shifted gears and started working with families directly because empowering parents, I think, is the the key to shifting this whole thing. So I started working with parents directly, and absolutely loved that. And then this opportunity to build the learning center happened, and I followed the call, and it's been an amazing experience.
So great, Allie. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your work working with families, because that was my understanding. Your first entry point into entrepreneurship was running that organization. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I started a company called Conscious Family Project. And what I did there is I started by creating courses and groups and coaching for families to help them find the best education situation for their children. And in particular, homeschooling. How do you homeschool under, there's so many different, I think, I'm sorry, I'm going to step back a second. There's so many ideas about what homeschool has to look like and what a family who's homeschooling has to look like, or what a child who's homeschooling has to look like. So it feels for a lot of people, just like my parents, it feels like the barriers to entry are just insurmountable, that you just can't get to it. And so really talking with families, getting to know them, talking through their child's skills and traits and developmental era, and helping them find a model of education that was going to serve their entire family really well is what I got really focused on. And I was really lucky to work with families from all over the world. I think I was up to like 1,000 families before I started working in the Learning Center. Families from different countries, different parts of our country, families who went the classical route, went unschooling route, who were working online. There's so many options right now. It's such a beautiful thing. And so really helping to encourage and empower parents to step in that driver's seat, find the best fit for them, and get going was my passion there, which also led to a lot of work in advocacy, especially here in California. So I joke that my kids have grown up in the state capitol here, and spoken on the floor, talking about the importance of really getting parents back in the driver's seat.
So then COVID happened,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and that enabled you to sort of shift gears from working in parent advocacy and working directly with families to help them navigate their education options to thinking about opening an actual microschool or a learning center, which ultimately became Beach Cities Classical. So tell us about that progression.
At that time, and I think if we all remember that time, it felt like so many of us were drowning, and so many parents, so many children were drowning. There just wasn't a place for them. There wasn't support that they needed. And the pastor at our church had started talking about this. And it was something that was already really weighing heavily on my heart because I was trying to help as many people as I could, but there just wasn't as many options as there are. There were gaps, there were holes in what was available. And he started talking about a school and starting a school. If you know anything about California, that is a unique proposition if you really want to have parents in the driver's seat and you want to do something that is um, not along with the status quo of education right now. It's a very challenging thing. And so as I was listening to him, I'm like, you know what? If you want to do that, we've got to do it differently. And I came up with the design of our program. We have two parts to our program. I know we'll talk about that a little later. But it was created with that intent in mind. And I used to say when we were getting started, I'm like, we're building lighthouses and lifeboats. We are building something that they can come to, that they can have hope in, that we can help secure and get them to shore on the other side. So we built, the first conversation about this happened on 4th of July weekend in 2021. We opened October 2nd of that same span because we were building lighthouses and lifeboats, and we wanted to get that opportunity available to whoever needed it as soon as we possibly could.
And how many people did you launch with that fall?
We started with 32
Amazing.
actually, 32 kiddos. And then by the middle of the following year, we were at about 300.
Just amazing. And what was attracting families to this model? Because it was you are a homeschool program. Families are
Yeah.
recognized as homeschoolers. Were these families who were new to homeschooling as a result of COVID? Were they, in public schools prior? Or what was the demographic there?
So our initial 32 kids were all from public or institutional models, whether public or private. I have a heart for the homeschooling community. So part of our program, our practicum program that like is hands-on and project-based, I really geared that more towards homeschoolers with our kids being able to participate in both. But even with that, the vast majority of our enrollment came from both private and public schools in the area. And it was really interesting. We had to do a lot of education on what it meant to be homeschooling, how to do it legally, how to set up your records. And we would have monthly meetings where we would do trainings and then we would together help them find their samples and put all their stuff together. There was definitely a lot of education that went a part of that and building community around it. But I think the families in our area that needed this were family, a lot of them have two working parents. And they needed a place that they felt like they were able to participate in and know what was going on. That their child, we are a mastery approach, a mastery based program, and mastery in the true sense of the word. Our kiddos are all moving at their own pace, challenged against themselves only. And so many kids were feeling left behind, especially in the midst of COVID and just trying to grab at whatever was being thrown at them online. So our parents all had the thing that they all had in common was this sense that something had to be different. Their kids had a bigger and deeper need, and they could not access it with what was currently available. So that was the majority of our people. Now I would say we're closer to a quarter of people who've always homeschooled continue to homeschool, and two-thirds who are coming and new to homeschooling.
Wow. Oh, that's so great. So I'd love to hear both about the structure of Beach Cities Classical as well as the philosophy. Tell us about the philosophy of classical education and how that looks in your particular program. So both the structure and the philosophy.
So I'm going to start with the philosophy because our structure is not what people think of with classical education,
Mm.
which I love. So I love classical education. So classical education is one of the longest standing forms of education that we've had in our world. It's largely based on well, it's the goal of classical education is to develop virtue and character in the people who are learning and exposed to it. So it's really about developing a person from the inside out. And it's done through great books, rich, amazing books and literature. And then the other piece that I love is through Socratic discussion, really where in classical education, you're not doing rote memorization and regurgitation. The real root of classical education is to take in all these rich, wonderful books and texts, and then to formulate your own ideas through guidance and support from a facilitator or a mentor who has you question your own ideas about it. So you really have to drill down and develop your own knowledge from there. It's really important that they are surrounded and steeped in models of truth, beauty, and goodness, not only in the people that they're around, but in the environment and in the resources that they're exposed to. But really, at the end of the day, classical education is about developing virtuous people with strong character, which I absolutely love. And the critical thinking aspect of it is something that I feel strongly is really important right now. There's so many opportunities to be told what to think. And we really want our kids to be drilling down and figure out why they think what they think, and be able to discuss it and talk about it, be able to defend your position. And if not, maybe reconsider it. So that's the philosophy of classical education in its purest form and from my learning, my understanding. In our program, that's the part we highlight. You do see a lot of classical education that really does like the more structured approach where they're doing a lot of work. And I would say that's more neoclassical, and I understand where that's coming from. For us, I really wanted to focus more on the critical thinking and the being completely immersed in truth, beauty, and goodness. So we have two, well, kind of three parts of our program. We have our core program, which is where kiddos come in. They're in a class of 15 or less. They have one teacher, facilitator is what we call them, that guides them through the day, and they get all of their initial instruction in their core subjects. They also spend a lot of time in discussion. Even our kinders are having Socratic discussions about Hansel and Gretel and all kinds of things. But we have them start having those discussions and asking those questions really early. We also have them doing public speaking, and so instead of show and tell, we call it presentations, and we focus on different skills so they can communicate their ideas well. But that's in our core. And all of our core program has home study as well. So that's how we can get through all of the meat. And then the other part of our program is practicum. And practicum is our hands-on project-based approach to classical education. So I always say it's how we get classical up on its feet. And in that side, our kids come in and we keep our entire program on the same cycle of history at the same time so that families can have conversations together around the dinner table. So we provide our families with resources for discussion questions at dinner, extra books they can read, movies, activities they can do together. One of my favorites was when we were learning about the revolution, they took turns taxing each other. So like the kids, that was the family project at home. The kids would tax the parents and then see what their response would be and back and forth. So things like that to really get families involved. So we're all moving through the same part of history at the same time. And then on the practicum days, they're taking music and they're learning music theory. They're learning how to read and write music, but they're also learning about the songs that were popular or used at that time. Maybe it's a freedom song during the civil rights movement. Maybe it's a hymn that was popular at that time, but they're learning about the music of the time. We have entrepreneurship, inventors class, where they remake inventions from the time in history they're studying. The list goes on. We even have moving through history, which is our PE class. So when they were doing World War II, that was also around the time that football was discovered. So the teams were different countries and they had to play with different rules based on the country. So we have a lot of fun. And then we have community day every week where they do a special class as a family or a field trip.
Just amazing. So how often are the students on campus and how often are they home?
So it's completely up to the families. They could be there one day a week, or they could be there up to 4 days a week on campus with the community day. We also have families that just do our community events and then come to us for support. They might use our curriculum outline, but they're home for 4 days. So it really varies, and we wanted it that way so families could really decide what works best for them.
So, Allie, you said that the majority of your families now are kind of new to homeschooling,
Mhm.
coming from a traditional schooling environment. Are you finding that they're more attracted to your program because of the classical philosophy, which I know is growing increasingly popular across the country? Is it the flexibility of homeschooling and sort of schedules that aren't so strict and rigid as they are in traditional schools? Why are families coming?
Such a good question. Um, I would say that as many as of our families that aren't familiar with homeschooling, they're also not familiar with classical when they come to us either.
Hmm.
I think that's starting to shift. I think people are becoming more aware of classical in our area, but that's not usually, they don't really usually, when I'm doing tours and things, they don't actually know what classical is. So we have like a little sit down teaching time before we start our tours. I think what draws people most to our program and in having conversations is number one, that parents are really actively engaged and a part of what we do. We include them in everything. We have a progress monitoring document, is what we call it, for our core program. And it is a living document that goes back and forth between parents and facilitators every day. So facilitators are writing in like, hey, this happened, this worked really well. Parents can be like, hey, when we were doing home study, that did not work. So we tried this, or do you have another idea? It's this living document going back and forth. We include our parents in our prayers and pledges every morning. They are really actively involved in the community and encouraged to be so. They're in the classrooms, they're at the events. We want to hear from them. And I think that that's the primary thing is that the parents are coming and they're like, okay, my kiddo, like I will have a say in what's going on with my kiddo here. I get to be a part of it. There's complete transparency in what's happening. And there's a community of other parents who want the same, and are, even though they have varying levels of time, are wanting to be that engaged in their children's education too. I find that it's that desire for community, transparency and support, I think, is really what draws most of the families to us.
That's amazing. So, California is an interesting place. It's relatively easy to homeschool. There's a large homeschool population. There are hybrid homeschool programs run through charter schools that are publicly or taxpayer funded, but public charter schools for families who might identify as homeschoolers, where they're able to either learn virtually or, kind of hybrid and in-person classes. So there are, and there have been for a long time, different education options there. What are you seeing now, especially since COVID, in the world of innovative or alternative education in California?
I am in awe every day. I feel like people are so creative and wonderful. Um, Because the reality is, in my opinion, there is no one type of education that's going to serve everybody. It's just not, it's not possible. We are too different. Our families are too different, which is what makes us so strong and what is so incredible. So I am seeing learning centers, charter programs, charter vendors is what we call them. So people who offer services that can be paid for through charters. There are new and innovative things happening every day here. Um, the the need for private options not related to the charter is also growing. Charters are getting increasingly regulated here. And, and that may, in a way, that makes sense. Some people are going to be mad I said that, but it does, because we were the wild, wild west for charters for a long time in California. And people are so surprised that it is actually so easy to homeschool here. It's a very simple process, very low regulation. But all of the other options are continuously, the regulation is continuing to increase. So people are getting more and more creative. There's more nature programs.
Mhm.
I have a friend who just started a collective. It's like an art studio that they have access to everything, for all. It's kind of like if you took Montessori, Reggio, and Waldorf and put it in a blender and then added, I don't even know. It's a really cool program that she's got going. We've got there's more and more every day, and I hope and pray that people continue to keep building these things, because every kiddo needs something different.
And what is next for Beach City Classical for you? What are your plans? You're continuing to serve now over 250 students. What is on the horizon?
Well, we're going to continue to serve our community. We are in working on getting our own building, or a
Mm.
larger space. I kind of joke that we're hanging kids from the rafters at this point. We actually turn the sanctuary into classrooms during the day, and so we have to set up and tear down every day. So getting a
Mm.
building is a big part of our future. And then the curriculum itself. I'm working on packaging and making available to more people, including all of the back end, how we run everything. I went from a staff of 3 to a staff of over 50 in a very short period of time, and learned a lot. And so I've been collecting those resources, and I'm hoping to make those resources in the curriculum available to whoever needs it. We've been really, really blessed in how many people we've been able to serve and how the kids have been able to grow. And so if we can help that happen, anywhere else, that I think that's the next step.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, the structure of your program that puts parents in the driver's seat, that allows for this flexible scheduling. Obviously, all of the students are homeschoolers. Because I'll often hear people say, well, why don't these micro schools or similar programs just become private schools?
Mm.
And, I'd love your thoughts on that too. But typically it's that they don't want that rigidity. They don't, I'm going to have you speak for yourself, but you don't want that lessening of parent empowerment or the seat time requirements that might be required by the state if you're a recognized private school. I wonder if you can speak further about that.
I have a lot of opinions here. I'll also say that being in California does give a different tinge to this, because the moment that you are a private or public school, not only do requirements change for seat time, for testing,
Mm.
for a specific curriculum being taught, but also for things that your family might personally choose and things related to your body, your health. There's some pretty significant layers of control or let's say, requirements or mandates that go along with choosing to be a part of either the private or public schooling system here in California. And so just that alone makes that to us a line we'll never cross because I believe that parents get to make those decisions regardless of what they choose. It's their right to make those decisions. They know their children best. And so in California, that would preclude us from ever crossing over into either private or public schooling options, whether that's taking charter funds or becoming a private school. I would also say that nationwide, there's another layer where the private school accreditations vary widely, but have also had a lot of commingling with states' requirements. And so, in many states, the private schooling systems and programs and accreditations are so intertwined that you really can't tell the difference at the end of the day anymore. And I think that we're at a time where we desperately need true innovation in
Mm.
education. And so these barbed wire fences getting put over that is just preventing us from actually serving the kids who need to be served right now.
Yeah, and of course, you discovered that firsthand in your time in the classroom trying to make change from within the system, and then realized quickly that really that innovation experimentation is going to happen best outside of a conventional classroom, whether public or private, and certainly what you're building there. So you alluded to this a little bit, Allie, but I'd love to kind of wrap up on this thought of the growing momentum for these alternative education models. You know, we're 4 years after the school closures of 2020 that really supercharged this movement. Of course, you were involved in the movement prior to that. Where do you see this going? Do you think we're going to plateau out at some point, or do you see that the sky is the limit here?
I think it's interesting because some of the families who initially joined us have moved on, and largely that has been either a financial choice, like we are going to go back to the free option because the heat's off in the moment, or because they feel like we talk a lot in homeschooling about the deschooling process, the process of unlearning all the things you didn't learn by being a part of a systematized education or institutional education approach. And it's not easy to let go of those things that we've been told are synonymous or necessary for learning, for education, for childhood, even. So I think there's still quite a bit of education and discussion that has to happen and for families to see that they can fully let go of some of these other things that really never served to start with, but just became habitual. I think there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. I think it is happening. I think that it's a snowball going down the hill, and even when we lose some pieces along the way, we're picking up so much more because the fruit of what we're doing is there. We just had our graduation. We had 3 graduates this year, and they are a true testament to what's possible. Like the more that's happening, the bigger the ball is going to get. But I do think realistically, we're a generation or so away from having a more universal understanding of what's possible and what we can actually let go of. So I think the momentum's building, but I think it might be a little slower right now while we do that education. And shortly, I think it'll explode even more and hopefully, in my opinion, take over.
Well, and it's thanks to education entrepreneurs like you who are building these new possibilities. And then, like you said, through sort of social proof of graduates and people going on to live fulfilling adult lives, reflecting on their experiences and wanting that for their children ultimately too. So it's a multi-generational game, and it seems like we're in the right, moving in the right direction. So, Allie, if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about Beach Cities Classical, connect with you, and follow your progress, how can they do that?
You can find us on Instagram or on our email, beachcitiesclassical.com. And you can find me at Alia Dare Chung. .com.
Well, best wishes for your future work. I look forward to following your progress and connecting with you again soon. Ali Adair Chung, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you for having me.